So I was just creating a practice exam for my Excel expert students, and because I'm a teacher who believes in accessible learning so you can unlock new opportunities, I thought I would share 3 projects with you guys. And these 3 projects are going to go over Excel expert skills, such as how to do advanced formulas, advanced options when it comes to conditional formatting, and how you can create macros in Excel. So make sure you watch this video to the end. I've got 15 tasks for you that are considered worldwide industry standard Excel expert skills, and hopefully to help you pass your Excel expert exam if you're writing one, or maybe you're already an Excel expert and you just want to see which skills you should know to be considered an Excel expert. So we'll start off nice and easy with one of the easier Excel expert skills, but it's still considered an Excel expert skill by industry standards, which is how to use a fill series feature in Excel. So we're going to fill the range D4 to F7 with a pattern that's already happening in columns B and C. So you see that each of these numbers grows by 100. We're just going to keep that pattern going. So the way you can do that really quickly and easily is to highlight this whole area. And then at the bottom of the area that we just highlighted, use the fill handle and drag it all the way to the right to cover that area D4 to F7, and then drop the fill handle. But notice something about the shading when I release this handle. So the blue shading in the background, it goes away. So you might also have to protect that formatting, or if you want to keep that formatting, you can release the fill handle, which will continue the pattern, but also click on this autofill options button. And if you click the drop arrow, it's got a few options here. If we wanted to keep that blue shading, we'd have to click fill without formatting so that the formatting doesn't just erase because we used the fill feature. The next Excel expert skill that I'm going to show you is how to use lookup functions. So a lookup function will retrieve values from a table of data that match a specified condition. So in this worksheet, we have a lookup table right here, and you'll notice that the lookup table has values that you can look up through the rows and not the columns. So there's 2 types of lookup tables. There's either a vertical lookup table or a horizontal one. So for example, if we wanted to take a look at the information and find out what exam is being taught, we'd have to go from left to right, or if we want to know the proctor or the sign-up number, those are all contained in the rows. So we know that we're dealing with a horizontal lookup table. So instead of using the VLOOKUP, which is a vertical table, we're going to use the HLOOKUP in this formula. So now that we know that we're dealing with an HLOOKUP function, there's specific parts of the HLOOKUP function that we need to fill out. And the next part is understanding whether we need an exact match or an approximate match. So an approximate match could be used, let's say if you had student grades and you wanted to give an A to students who get a score of between 80% and 100% on their final test, that would be a range lookup. But we're dealing with telephone numbers here or sign-up numbers, and there's not a range there, it's a specific number. So we need an exact match in column B. So let's get started in the cell C4. We're gonna start typing equal HLOOKUP, and then I'm gonna click in the insert function dialog box, which will help us decide which values we need so that we can fill out this function argument. Okay, so our lookup value, that's the one we know. So in this cell, C4, we know that the Excel exam is here, and it has a reference somewhere in the table. The table array is the actual table itself, and if we want the information that we need, all of the information that we need is right here in this table. And if we want to copy this down later, which we're going to do in this example, you can press the F4 key on your keyboard, and that's going to hang on to this table so it doesn't go anywhere, and it keeps referring back to this table as we move the functions down the C column. And then the row index number. So this is the information, the row that you don't have information from or that we're looking up. So the information that we're looking up is the numbers. That would be row 3 in this example. So we're going to select row 3 or type 3. And because now normally we would, if this was a range, we would be done there. We could press OK, a number would pop up. But because we have to specify that this is not a range lookup like an HLOOKUP typically would look up, so we have to type in false. So there's a little hint down here. If it's an exact match, you type false. If it's true, it's a range lookup. So we type in false, and now you see that the telephone number comes up because it knows that we're not looking up a range. We're looking up a very specific telephone number. So when we press OK, this cell will look up the values in here and say, okay, which number do we need for the Excel exam? Okay, it's that one right there. And then if we were to copy this down a long list here, it would save us time because we don't have to keep referring to the table ourselves. We could just let the lookup function do that for us. And then we copy it down and it works for all the other exams. So that's how you would use a lookup function. And if you were doing a vertical table instead, it would be pretty much the same, just instead of rows, you're dealing with columns. So another important Excel expert skill that you should know is how to create simple macros. And macros are basically a way to automate very repetitive tasks. So if you had to insert a header onto every worksheet that you complete, or a header on every workbook that you open, you could do that by creating a macro, which is basically a recording of what you're doing that would repeat itself. So you wouldn't have to keep doing sort of repetitive tasks. It would just you click of a button, you could just get the task done if you recorded a macro. So that's what we're going to do in the step 3. We're going to create a macro named header. We're basically going to store a header on this worksheet and then have the macro record it while we do it, so that maybe the next time we open a workbook or a worksheet, we don't have to do that again. All right, so to record a macro in Excel, you could use the developer tab, but that one you have to add in. You can also use the view tab. And on the very right of the view tab ribbon here, there's some macro options, and one of them is to record the macro. So we have to give the macro a name. It's called, we want this to be header. And you should probably pick a key for this one. So if you wanted it to be, I don't know, Control and H for header. So maybe that'll be our code. When we press Control H, it's automatically going to repeat the steps that we're going to do. And we want it to be stored in this workbook, not the whole computer. And you could give a description if you want, but we weren't asked to on this task. So we'll just say OK to get started on this recording. Now there's a few ways you could accomplish this task. My favorite way is just to go down to the page layout view here. So I'm going to go to the page layout view. And then right in here, I would start typing this, although I've already done that while I was practicing this. So I'm just going to repeat that step. So just make sure that's blank. And then I'm going to type this out, Massachusetts Testing Center. Okay, so then when I'm done, I'll click outside of there. The header is done. And then I'll go back to the normal view so that my macro knows I want to not only complete that, but go back to normal view every time. And then I'll click on the view tab, and then I'll go to the macro area to stop the macro from recording. Okay, then in theory, when you press Control H, it should enter that very specific header every time you press Control H on a worksheet. So another Excel expert skill that you should know is how to alter pivot tables. And one way to do that is to group values in a pivot table. So we're going to do that in this example by modifying the pivot table to group the data by the values in the price column. And then we're going to group the values in steps of 100, beginning at 1 and ending at 200. So basically we're going to take these rows and kind of condense them into 2 different groups. So the way you would do that is just click anywhere inside of this pivot table, and then I'm going to right click and the option to group comes up. So I'll click that, and we're going to start at 1. So it says starting at 1 to 200. So that's our range here. We want to group by 100. Okay, so basically there's going to be 2 groups, either below 100 or above 100. And then we'll press OK. And that's how you can group data in a pivot table. So by default, Excel has a setting that refreshes the worksheet or recalculates every formula that you use whenever any change is made. And sometimes that can bog down the system and make things slow, and you might have to wait a few minutes. So one Excel expert skill that's really good to know is how to turn that off. So the way you can turn off the automatic evaluating of formulas in your workbook is to change the settings. So to change these settings, we would go to the File tab and then look for Options. And then in the Formulas tab here, we want to look for the calculation options. So the default is automatic, but if you have a lot of formulas, like I said, it can get really bogged up, and every time it changes, it can slow down your workbook if you have tons of worksheets with lots of formulas on them. So if you wanted to change that and make sure that it only updates the formulas and doesn't slow down while you're making edits, you can choose the manual option, and then it'll recalculate workbook before saving. But you might not want to do that too, so you can uncheck that and just manually change the workbook formulas yourself. But this is the one that will allow you to, it'll evaluate the changes when you save the workbook and won't slow down your workbook at all. So that's the one we're going to use, and all you'd have to do is click manual instead of automatic to turn that off, and then press OK. So just like the last step where we changed some Excel settings, you might also have to enable or disable macro settings in your workbook. So we're going to do one where we disable all macros in our workbook without notification. So that's just one of the macro settings that you can choose, but there's a few you can choose from. So to get to that spot in an Excel workbook, that is located in the File tab. So we'll click there. And then in the Options tab, you'll see something, the Excel options box come up like this. And then this is in the Trust Center. So we will have to look for the Trust Center tab and then go to Trust Center settings and then look for the macro settings. So in our example, we want to fix the macro settings. We can find in this tab. And then we've got 4 macro settings here. By default, my version of Excel would go to disable all macros without notification already, but just in case you had to enable all macros, you could do that here, but it is a little bit risky. So as the warning says here, so here are all your 4 macro settings that you should be aware about if you're doing an Excel expert exam, or you just want to know how to change some macro settings in your workbook. Another Excel expert skill that you should know that happens sort of in the background of a workbook is how to change a password and different password options as well. So for this one, we're going to configure the workbook so that users have to enter the password Wendy's before they can make structural changes to the workbook. So if you don't want people adding stuff to your workbook or changing them, you can add a password to prevent users who maybe don't have the password from doing so. So to do that, we'll go to the File tab, we'll click on the Info tab within here, and then under the Protect Workbook options, we'll choose Protect Workbook Structure. So there's a few password options, but this one doesn't totally block people from viewing your workbook. It just prevents them from making workbook structure changes. So we'll just click on that one, and then we'll enter the password here, or just copy and paste it. Better to copy and paste because you actually have to add it twice. So I'll paste it here, and then we just want to protect the workbook for structure. So I'll press OK, and then I'll paste it again. And then click OK again. And now users can't make changes to this workbook unless they have the password. So for an Excel expert skill, you should probably know how to do conditional formulas, but there's even trickier conditional formulas that are not considered like core skills. Basically, like an average if or a sum if would be a core skill, or the if function would be a core skill. But the average ifs or sum ifs, plural, so with an S at the end, would be considered Excel experts. So let's see how we can use that in this example. So we're going to enter a formula that returns the average sales revenue for stores located in Montreal and are considered full restaurants. So there's 2 criteria there, and we're looking for stores in Montreal, and we're looking for stores that are considered full. So there's 2 different types of criteria. So that means we have to use the average ifs. So ifs plural, so I'll show you what that looks like, equal average ifs, and then open bracket. Okay, because the average if is sort of a core skill, it's sort of beginner or intermediate, but average ifs, count ifs, sum ifs, those are considered more advanced or expert level skills. So let's look at how we do that. So we just start off with the average range. So it actually wants the average of the sales revenue. So that's the average range. The criteria range is actually the cities, because we want to, from our selection, select the cities within that. And then our first criteria is in Montreal. So we just want the stores or restaurants in Montreal. So we'll put quotations, because this is a text value, around Montreal. And then the next criteria range, we already have the average range for both criteria. So the next criteria range is a full restaurant versus a express restaurant. So we'll highlight this range here. And this data set isn't very big, but you can imagine this would save you a lot of time if your data set went down to like 100 rows. This would save you a lot of time when you're creating kind of a summary page for this, or a summary table. So the criteria there is we want to look for the full ones. So we'll put full in quotations again. So we'll go down that list and tell you which restaurants were full and which restaurants were kind of considered express. Then we'll click OK. And that is the average sales for both restaurants in Montreal and ones that are considered full versus the express ones. So in Excel, it's really easy to make errors when you're typing out formulas, and sometimes you can make sort of a small typo that will change what your formula is, and you'll have like an error message pop up. So the way that you can check and fix an error is using the error checking feature in Excel. And to do that, we'll go to the Formulas tab to look for some errors. So we have this error checking option, and we'll click the error checking one. And then because the formulas around it work, like it'd be different if your whole column had a warning sign when it came to a formula, but every other formula seems to work except this one, so it could have been just a small typo. In that case, you could just say, go to here and say copy formula from above, which seems to work. And that's how you would fix that kind of error. So maybe if it was just like a small typo, you'd click fix the error check is complete, and then click OK. And now we fixed that error. So there's a small typo in there. That's how you would fix it, by going to the Formulas tab and then go to the error checking options. So in a table or pivot table in Excel, you can add a slicer to that table or pivot table. And what a slicer is it's kind of a very visually appealing way to filter out information. It's a little bit like a remote control for your TV. It just kind of allows you to select certain values in your pivot table or table. So I'll show you what that looks like, and you should probably know this for your Excel expert skills. So I'll click somewhere inside of the pivot table here, and then in the pivot table analyze tab, there will be this option to add a slicer, which is right here in the filter group. So insert slicer, and I think the task is going to ask us to filter the pivot table by city. Okay, so we're going to choose the city options. So press OK. And then so we've got this kind of remote control around the 4 cities from our data, and it wants us to select the Toronto one. But if you want to select multiple cities, you could select one and then hold down Control on your keyboard and select multiple ones at the same time. Just depends on which ones you wanted to keep in and which ones you want to filter out. But in our case, we'll just pick the Toronto ones. Okay, so now we're going to do another Excel expert skill using subtotals, but not just subtotals, because subtotals is sort of like a beginner and intermediate skill, but we're going to add 2 subtotals to the same worksheet. So that's a little bit more expert level. And I'll show you a little trick to doing that so you don't override the first change that you make when you're adding 2 subtotals to the same worksheet. Okay, so for our example, it wants us to calculate the total number of lessons that the instructors taught and how much we owe them, basically. So we're going to display the total lessons and the total due, or how much we owe them, for all instructors below the data. Now there's 2 things before we get started that you should know if you're ever creating subtotals in the real world. If you're going to group something together, or if you're going to get subtotals from a repeated value, like the instructors, you have to have them organized where they're kind of grouped together. So Garrett, our instructor, isn't kind of all over the map here. All of the Garrett entries are together, and all of the instructors, like myself here, are gathered together, and Julian as well is grouped together. Okay, so this wouldn't work. It'd be really messy if these values weren't grouped together. So just keep that in mind. If you're getting these subtotals of a repeated value, you have to keep them together or sort them together. Okay, and the second thing to remember is this would not work if this was a table. So you can't get subtotals from a table, but you can get it from a structured range like this one. So if you click anywhere in here and the table options come up, you just have to go to the table options and convert this to a range and take off some of those table features that would block the subtotal feature in Excel. So we know that our values are organized and this is not a table, so we can get started. The first thing I'm going to do is highlight the range that we need to analyze here. So I'll just highlight this whole range here, and then I'll click on the Data tab. This will open up the Data ribbon, and I'll click on the subtotal icon to get started with our subtotals. And what we want to see is at each change in instructor, so at each change at instructor, which is right here, we're going to use the sum, so we want the total number of hours. So that's the first one. How many hours did they teach? So we have to kind of search for it. or sorry, the number of lessons. It was the number of lessons that they taught. So we want to get the total for that. So let's press OK on the first one. Pretty straightforward. You can see the instructors and how much, the number of lessons that they taught, and that's great. So this would sort of be an intermediate level use of the subtotal feature. But to be a little bit more advanced, we're going to add another subtotal to this worksheet. So we'll do the same thing we did before. We've got this range highlighted. We'll click on subtotals again. And this time, instead of number of lessons, we're going to change this to the total due, or how much is owed to them. But there's one key thing here. When we're adding this new subtotal, you have to make sure that you take off this replace current subtotals, because it'll just undo. It'll kind of just undo what we just did and replace what we did with the total due, and then it'll take away the number of lessons values. So we have to just uncheck that, and then make sure it says each change in instructor, we get the sum of the total due. And then we'll click OK. And now we've got two subtotals going on at the same time. So how much we owe them and how many lessons they taught. All right, so that's how you would use two subtotals at the same time. So another Excel expert skill is how to use advanced conditional formatting options. And we see that there's already conditional formatting added to this worksheet, and we're going to modify it so that every time we see the text every day, it turns out to be bold and italic font with no fill color like this red here. The first thing that this task doesn't mention is that to do that and to do it properly, you have to actually erase the current conditional formatting that's happening here. So I'm going to highlight column B and then go to the conditional formatting options, and then I have to clear the rules. So I have to clear the rules from the selected cells, and now we can add our own custom conditional formatting in there. So with column B still selected, I'm going to click on the conditional formatting drop arrow, and then I'm going to look for text that contains. So that's in the highlight cell rules tab, text that contains, and I want to type in every day, even though there's a typo the way I spelled every day there with two words. So just every day, and then instead of, this is sort of the option we had last time, instead this time we're going to do a custom format because the one we want isn't there. So this is going to, the format cells dialog box is going to pop up, and then from here we want to do the bold italic option, and then just make sure that there's no color there. So no fill color, and the font is bold and italic. So we'll just press OK, and then press OK again here, and that's how you would complete a task like this one. So Excel has several functions that work with dates and times, and these functions are particularly useful in workbooks that involve production schedules and calendars. And for this example, we kind of want to figure out what day of the week this date corresponds to without having to look up the actual date in a calendar. So one way you could do that is to use the weekday function, which would calculate the weekday from a certain date, where 1 equals Sunday, 2 would equal Monday, and so forth. So the week would start on Sunday as a 1, Monday 2, Tuesday 3, and then you go throughout the weeks. So this is what that would look like. And I'll show you another option so that you could have it where you calculate the date and the day of the week actually pops up. But let's do that first one, just very basic weekday function. So we'll do equal weekday, and then open bracket, and I'll just click on this date here, and then close the bracket and press enter. So we know it's a Sunday because we just said that, a 1 is a Sunday, but someone who's new to this might not know that. So there's a way to set this up where you can change the formatting ahead of time so that when you add in this weekday function, the actual weekday will pop up. So first we have to format that in the numbers group. So I'm going to click on this number formatting dialog box with this in this cell B14, and I'm going to format it so that it gives us the date instead of a number. So it'll convert the number to whatever day it is. And oddly enough, it's not in the date options, it's in the custom options. So we have to scroll all the way down in the custom options, and there's a 4-letter D, which stands for the day of the week. So we have to choose that one and press OK. And now when we go to do this weekday function, so we'll do equal weekday, open bracket, and again, we'll select this cell with the date in it, B13, and close the bracket and press enter. Now the actual date pops up. So which is cool about this is if I change the date here to test it, so let's say maybe we want the 18th. Okay, that would tell you which day of the week the swim school begins. So as an Excel expert skill, you might also have to add in some chart elements that you don't usually use in Excel. As an example, adding in two charts together, or two values that you're looking at within two different charts on the same axis. I know that probably sounds confusing, but we'll get right to it. We'll just highlight all of the information here in this worksheet, and then we'll start making our charts. So we'll say Insert tab once we've got our information highlighted, and then I'm going to click this See All Charts option, and then I'll click the All Charts tab. Now this is something called, it doesn't say it right in the task, but it's a combo chart where you have two charts going on at the same time on the same axis. So this one, the salary part, we want an area chart. So just the default area chart here, and the revenue generated as a line chart. And then don't put don't click the secondary axis because it wants it on the same axis. And then we'll click OK, and that's what this chart would look like. So we have two charts kind of on the same axis, and that's how you would do that. So I noticed on Excel core exams, we usually have to change one type of chart element and then move on to the next task. But when it comes to Excel expert exams, we usually have to change a few chart elements at the same time, and we have to do it quickly. So this one is going to ask us to modify the chart to use layout 3, style 6, and then we're going to change the colors to monochromatic 5, and we're also going to change the chart title to revenue per lesson. So it really doesn't matter which order you do them in, as long as you can do all of those fairly quickly. So the first thing that would probably take the most time is changing the title, and I could probably copy and paste to make this a little bit quicker, or just type in here revenue per lesson. Okay, so now we've got our chart title, and now I'm going to click on the chart area and then pull up the chart design tab so that we've got our options. We want the style 6 from the styles gallery, so that's the one with the dark background. We're going to change the colors to the 5th row in the monochromatic section, so that's this one. And then the quick layout is layout 3. And there we've made about 4 changes to our chart really quickly. And that's something that you should be able to do on your Excel expert exam. Not just make changes in a chart, that's not too challenging, but doing them really quickly is the challenging part. So if you want more Excel expert practice, I've got a whole course on this, and I'll put the link to it in the description below this video. Also in the comments, let me know which skills you'd like me to cover. If there's something I missed, please let me know. And if you want to refer to the last practice exam video I have, I'll post that at something around the screen. And if you can click on that to see my latest practice exam. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.